Chances are good you did not find a drone under the tree last Christmas, but it's not as far-fetched a notion as it once was. Drones are increasingly affordable and increasingly popular. As a result, federal, state, and local officials are now scrambling to figure out what restrictions to impose. Maryland State Senator Jim Rosapepe joins us now, a Democrat. He represents Prince George's County in Annapolis. It's good to see you.
Same here.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Talk about the discussion that you and others are helping to launch as these devices proliferate and as the concerns about them multiplying.
Well, obviously they are proliferating. Technology is changing. People know mostly about drones in the context of their military uses overseas, lethal drones where weapons are added to them, or hobbyists where someone is playing around in Washington, D.C. and their drone flies out of the White House lawn. And both of those are of concern. We need to worry about them. But the bigger issues related to drones are the commercial uses of drones. They're great for photography, for journalism. They're great for real estate agents to show houses. They're great for farmers to inspect their crops. They're great for search and rescue missions for the police.
Right.
So there are lots of good uses for them. But obviously there are privacy concerns, and as we saw at the White House, there are safety concerns. So the legislature is passing legislation to have state agencies over the next year do a study of the pluses, the minuses, the opportunities, the dangers, to come up with a state policy. It's like any other new technology. Think of cars. Cars kill a lot of people. They also transport a lot of people. And so we have to develop a regulatory framework that gets the benefits and minimizes the cost.
Who's most likely to hold sway, as it were? Are we likely to have a sort of a federal set of rules that's kind of one size fits all? Or are we in a process now where all 50 states and maybe some localities within the 50 states are fashioning policies that work in that area?
Yeah.
More of a patchwork.
Yes, we're going to have all of that. Because the federal government owns the airspace. As soon as you get off the ground, the federal government owns the airspace. So state and local governments aren't going to regulate the airspace. That's what FAA is doing. They've put together proposals for smaller drones that fly below 400 feet. They're in the line of sight of the pilot who's on the ground. They are a long way off from doing regulations for bigger drones that fly at higher levels. So the federal government's going to have a big role, should have a big role, just as they do with helicopters and airplanes. We don't want the city of Alexandria regulating the airspace above National Airport. We want the FAA doing that. So the federal government definitely has a role. But state and local governments have a role too, because one part of it is, how do the government itself use drones? I mean, we already have public safety agencies that are using drones for public safety purposes. We want to make sure that those are being used in a way that protect the public and don't endanger the public.
You did a great job at the outset of talking about all the great assets, and clearly this technology is with us to stay, and you know, we'll see if that ends up being more of a positive than a negative, whatever.
You'll do both.
You can never put the genie back in the box.
Absolutely. That's right.
With these new technologies, once they arrive and once the costs come down, you better get used to it because they're here to stay.
I agree with that.
But what happened at the White House, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking in detail about the bad things because it's sort of self-evident, but the White House incident, and then the privacy concerns. I mean, is someone going to be able to photograph in a window on the 12th floor of a building that otherwise no one would have had the logistical ability to
Absolutely.
do? I mean, is privacy over unless you draw the shades 24/7?
Well, I would say do draw the shades. I mean, the fact of the matter is that people have to...
But some people like daylight.
Well, some people like daylight too, but in general, I mean that in a metaphorical sense. I mean, so much of the extent to which we've given up privacy in this country is we've done it ourselves on Facebook. And so the reality is, if you don't want people looking in your window, do close the blinds. That's just common sense. That's what my parents told me, and I think it was good advice. You're right, though, that higher buildings, which more difficult to invade people's privacy in the past, easier to do it now. So we have to have rules that deal with that issue. But on the other hand, we shouldn't overdo it in the sense that we've had helicopters for a long time, so to the extent that people wanted to fly low in and close, they could do it. But you're right, that the pricing and the economics create a new set of issues that we have to address. So one of the things our legislation does is ask the State Attorney General's office and state government to identify those issues and identify, are there some local fixes we can do on the privacy issue? But safety is also a big issue, in addition to privacy.
Talk about that.
Well, you wouldn't want to be walking down the street and have a drone crash on your head. And that's one of the issues for the federal government with the FAA. They're very concerned about drones flying near airports, flying into planes that are operated by people but with hundreds of passengers on them. So there are a whole set of safety issues about where you can fly, how much control you need to fly. One of the technological issues that is not as well developed as it needs to be, but they're working on very hard, including the University of Maryland is a coordinator of a big regional grant with research at the Patuxent Naval Air Station in St. Mary's County, Virginia, looking at, among other things, developing the technology for drones to see each other. I think of it, it's not radar, but think of it a little bit like radar, so that right now the pilot of a plane can see other planes. You need an unmanned plane to be able to see other planes so they don't crash into each other, let alone crash into manned planes.
How long are people going to be out? How long are people going to be able to buy one of these things and operate it with no license, no registration, no safety requirement? Because right now, the only impediment is desire and cost, correct?
No, actually not.
All right,
it's basically illegal to operate drones for commercial purposes without the approval of the FAA.
But what about, okay, well, I was asking about hobbyists.
Well, hobbyists have an exemption, but they still have to obey the law, meaning they can't fly above 400 feet. They can't fly it that's out of line of sight. There are a whole series of regulations related to it. So people are violating some of those. There's no question about it. But enforcement is going to pick up as well. And so it's another reason why we need to get a focus on how do we enforce the current laws, how do we change the laws we need to make, how do we get out in front of this issue. Can I add one more point?
Please.
We're focused right now on unmanned aerial, but a whole parallel technology is moving forward on unmanned watercraft and unmanned groundcraft. We call them driverless cars. So this issue is actually bigger than drones.
What's happening in Annapolis? Talk about the conversation. What do you expect to get back in terms of whatever thinking and research?
Well, what we want by the end of this year is for the state government, the state agencies, all of them, Public Safety, Attorney General, Department of Economic Development, University of Maryland, to come back to us with a series of recommendations and options of how the state might try to get the benefits of drones while minimizing the problems.
You talked earlier about the Facebook era and how we really have a lot less privacy than we used to, and a lot of it is because of things that folks share, and I get that, and that's funny and all, but I do want to, before we just peel away another layer of privacy and say, oh well, this is the cost of living in the modern era, which at the end of the day it might end up being, but think about if my teenage daughter is sunbathing in the backyard and we've got a fence, and up until this exact moment, there's a pretty good expectation of some privacy. And now the pervy neighbor has a drone that's spying into our yard.
I couldn't agree more. I think you do have to keep the context in mind, though, that in the old days, 200 years ago, when we all lived in small towns, everybody knew everybody's business. Privacy came about with urbanization, the anonymity of living in the city. The fact of the matter is, and that's why I'm not just laughing at Facebook. Facebook and social media are part of this. We're becoming a village where everyone knows more about everybody else, and most of it at our own initiative. So we do need to use common sense, but we also need to have laws that help us protect our privacy.